Hi everybody, Stephanie Malding here. I write the blog Imperfected, all about beauty, ethics, and the art of retouching. A few weeks ago, I did an article on local color correction for skin, and I got some requests for a video tutorial to go along with it. So today I'm here to reiterate some of the color concepts I talked about on my blog. For those of you who haven't seen the article, I'll include a link in the description. Now, from my experience of color correction, and from what I've been told by others, the hardest part of the process is training your eyes to see the problems. The actual techniques are relatively simple. Unfortunately, this isn't an instant process, and all I can give you are a few suggestions. When I was in school, we worked with colored films that we flicked over the image to see how the different colors affected image portions and how to identify which ones corrected the casts. However, I haven't seen these in years, and I fear they might be hard to find now. I also wasn't working digitally at the time, so my best alternative advice, just play. Play with your adjustment layers and other color tools and learn what casts are affected by what adjustments. Studying color wheels is also helpful. We're almost always working with opposite colors. With a little play and study, before long you'll be able to identify color casts just by looking at an image. In the meantime, there is nothing wrong with trial and error. I still resort to it all the time. So let's get started. I'm going to assume a basic working knowledge of Photoshop with this tutorial and try to go quickly. Here we have our lovely model Sahar. She walked into my studio and requested to shoot without makeup, which I found absolutely delightful. For those of you who don't know me, I stress body positivity on my blog, and I love Sahar's confident body positive attitude. I've used a lot of these photos, some retouched and some unretouched. Today we're working with unretouched images. These photos are great for our color correction tutorial because makeup can smooth out color inconsistencies. Don't let makeup lull you into a false sense of complacency though. It can actually introduce color problems as well. Moving on to the actual image, the first thing we want to do is evaluate the problems we want to address. The first issue I see is her hands here. The image is almost backlit, giving these hands an otherworldly glow. They are very oversaturated in comparison to the rest of her skin, and we definitely want to tone that down. The next issue I see is that she has kind of a yellow-green discoloration here around her lips, especially here, here, and under here beneath her lip. The next issue that I see is that the majority of her face does not have the same color as her body or her hands. We do get into a little bit of a balancing act here because we're changing the color of her hands. What I think we're going to do is match everything to her body here because I'm not really thrilled with the color of her face or her hands. And of course we don't like the color around her lips. That's not a very flattering color. The last issue that I see may or may not be apparent on the video, and it is a very subtle issue. Her jaw is a little bit oversaturated and we're going to tone that down. Now let's get started making some actual adjustments. As I said, our first adjustment is going to be these hands. What we're going to do is come over here to our adjustment layers. We're going to choose a hue and saturation adjustment layer. Now, I never make my selections ahead of time, I just eyeball it. I know approximately where my target is. I'm going to drop this down to maybe a -20. And you can already see that this is a little more in line with what we wanted. Now we're going to invert our mask with Control-Command-I, and that resets us to where we want to be. Now you want to take your brush tool and be at opacity 100 and flow 100 and just paint that in on your mask. You can be a little sloppy here. You don't want to be too sloppy, obviously. And you can already see that that's a little more in line with our skin color on her back. You can toggle that on and off for you to see. If you want, you can set the blend mode to color. I don't feel that we need to on this particular image. We can leave it at normal. Now, our next adjustment is going to be around her mouth, where we get rid of this color cast. I am going quickly. I am skipping a couple things. I am being a little sloppy. Don't be sloppy on your own images. The next thing we're going to address is this discoloration around her mouth. What we want is a blank layer. We're going to set this to color blending mode. Come in with your brush again, and we are going to select an area of good color, and this is a little bit of trial and error. Now we probably don't want to be at 100% opacity. I usually drop this down to about a 50% flow, or 50% opacity. It's your preference. Now we're going to paint this in with a good color. We usually have to resample a couple of times. I don't like that color. Maybe that's a little better. Now this is a subtle adjustment. It's a little too saturated. We'll sample from her back. It's a little bit better. And we just paint in. And as you'll see, I am only affecting the color. I am not affecting any of the actual pixels. See, I can paint over her lips, and that only changes the color. I'm going to undo that. And if I toggle this on and off, you can see that I've changed the color around her mouth. I'm still not entirely happy with that, but as I said, I'm being a little sloppy here so that we can go quickly. And this is a little bit of trial and error until you get a color that you want. And you can also use this for blemishes if you want to just tone down the redness. But as I said, we're not really retouching this image because I like that it has kind of a raw quality to it. And that is how you selectively correct for little areas of discoloration. Our next issue is this really broad area of discoloration, and what we're going to do is a curves correction. I find that this is what people struggle with the most, but let's come down and just get ourselves a curves adjustment layer. And again, I don't usually make my selections ahead of time. You can. People work different ways. I'm going to eyeball this. I feel that this is a little bit blue and needs some yellow in it. We may also need to then introduce some magenta, but let's find out. Now what you can do is use this button here to directly select in your image what area you want to select, what area you want to adjust. Just drag up or down. So you can go up, you can go down. I suggest working with very, very small adjustments. Then we're going to again invert our mask and come in with a big brush at 100% opacity and paint in the area we want to affect. And see, that's already looking better. Maybe we don't want to go as far here. Now here is a trick that you should definitely know, and this is how to fade your brush strokes. I'm going to show you this on a new layer so that it's a little easier to see. Now, say I've just made a brush stroke. You want to be able to fade your brush strokes so that it's not as obvious. Now, the shortcut command for this is Control-Shift-F or Command-Shift-F, and this will allow you to go into the fade dialog, and you can dial back how opaque that is. You can also do your blend modes, but I don't use that very often. You probably have a use for that. You may not. This is a very handy thing to have, especially when working with masks. I'm going to delete that layer, and you can see where that would have come in handy when I was coming down here, and it was maybe a little bit too opaque, but I'm not going to worry about that right now. Now our last issue was that this area of jaw down here was a little too saturated. We're going to fix this exactly the same way that we fixed the hands, with a hue and saturation adjustment layer. And again, I'm going to drop my saturation just a little bit, maybe by 5, 6, 7 points, something like that. Invert my mask, come in here with a big brush, just drop that down. And that's matching a little bit better. Okay, now we can see that our whole image is looking a lot better. There are some areas that I have skipped, and that's for the sake of speed. But if I toggle this on and off, you can see that we have a much more even image all around. I could probably make this a little less yellow. We need to come in with an adjustment layer to selectively do the fingers, to do the palm of the hand, to do this area of the jaw rather than this area of the jaw. But we're going to skip that for the sake of speed because I want to show you one other technique on another image. On this image, we're actually going to use a quicker technique. This technique is a little more global, and where it really shines is when you're working on a large set of images where the skin tones all need to match so they look like a coherent story. As you can see, we're working with some of the same problems. There's some hyperpigmentation under her chin, there's some discoloration around her mouth, her face doesn't match her body. These are all very common problems. Almost everyone has them and almost every image has them, especially when you're working with little wardrobe, swimwear, underwear, nudes, things like that. What I'm going to do is apply a gradient map correction. What we're going to do first is pick our colors, and I usually pick them from within the image so that we're not changing the image all that much. So come over here to your colors and just click. And first we're going to pick a nice highlight. I like a highlight from, let's pick it from her body. Then we can pick a shadow. Let's also pick that from maybe here. And then we're going to come down here to our adjustment layers and pick gradient map. And it's going to create a gradient from the colors that you picked over here. I'm going to need to reverse that. It's pretty common. Now what you're going to see is that it's very muddy. We want to change this to color blending mode, and that's already looking a little better, but we want to edit our gradient map. Just click on the gradient. Now what I find is that it always looks a little muddy if you don't add a white to the highlight. So drag this over, just click and drag, then you can click on the highlight point. And that adds a new box. And you can click on the color and drag up to add a white. And you can drag this a little further. And just till it looks good. It's a subtle change. And hit OK. You want to dial back the opacity. I usually go a little lower than 50. Invert your mask. And what we're going to do is go in with a big brush, and I usually change the size of my brush as I'm painting, and paint in all of the areas of skin. I'm going to be a little sloppy for the sake of demonstration, so this might go onto my backdrop. Let me just fix that because it bothers me. And you want to be careful to avoid the lips, avoid the eyebrows. I have made the mistake of not avoiding the eyebrows. It looks really terrible. I usually also avoid the eyelids because it looks like eyeshadow if you avoid the eyelids. She's not wearing eyeshadow, but it looks like she is now. If you toggle that on and off, now she has an even skin tone. And if you want to increase the effect, just increase the opacity. And you can selectively avoid areas, add areas. Let me see what my mask is looking like. I skipped a few areas. Oh, oops, that was her thumb. Don't get overzealous. Okay, and so now you can see how we have an even skin tone all throughout. What can happen when you're using this technique is you can get some oversaturation. We're going to take care of that the same way we did our hand. Just drop that down a little bit. The only place I'm seeing this is around her hairline, which I'll show you in just a moment. Invert our mask, and the only place I'm seeing this is right here. But you can get it in all sorts of places. Just be vigilant about it. Now what I'm going to show you is how to apply this to multiple images. So I'm just going to drag this down because that's my favorite way to break images apart. Drag your gradient map to your other image. Minimize this and you'll see you'll get something ugly because of the mask. Just fill this with black or whatever color. Invert your mask and make sure that it's filled with black. And then go in and do the same thing. Paint in your gradient and you'll have the exact same color. I don't want to do that specifically on this image, but for the sake of demonstration, it'll get you the same color. Okay, thank you so much. This has been Local Skin Color Correction with Stephanie Malding. I hope that you join me for future tutorials, and please check out my blog at www.imperfectedblog.com.